Okay. All right. So, let's talk about what you said. So, you think the police aren't necessary in communities where people know each other, crime would be punished socially, and maybe at worst, militias to persecute murderers. And if the power lies with the people's concerns, prices will regulate to what people can afford. Someone has to represent, not rule necessarily. So, I'm going to take you to this graph or this drawing that I made. So, we're going to talk about, let's just assume in country A that this is true, that in state A, all of their provinces, they're all self-governing, they all have their own militia, they govern themselves, they protect themselves, and to each to their own, yada yada, everything else. And the same is for country B. They all have their own militias, they all protect themselves, and let's say what divides these two countries is a river. Now, what we're gonna basically talk about is, well, everything that was described is what we would call anarchy. Now, in anarchy, there is there's no police force. It's a system of self-help. And in anarchy, there rarely is states or anything. Let me see. I took notes real quick. Yeah. No police force, and there is no sovereign over the sovereign in what we described, in Marxism and syndicalism. There's no sovereign over the sovereign. And so I don't want to say what you said is wrong. Uh, in specific circumstances, uh, that what you said, it can be true. That can happen, and it's possible. Uh, but in a state where there are other countries and humans have the innate ability to be selfish, it sometimes isn't always the best thing. So let's say let's go to these countries. Let's see, little b right here, they are poisoning the water. They're poisoning the water, and little a, they can't use it for drinking. And, that creates conflict. And so what little a does, they go to little b and they say, hey, if you don't stop polluting the drinking water, we are going to shoot you. And whoa, for some reason, they start a shootout, and this leads to a small conflict happening. This leads to a small conflict, and in the system that we previously described of self-help, what little a, what they do, since they only have a small little militia, they call another A to come aid them. They call the second A and they go, okay, I'm going to send in my militia and attack little b. Well, little b, what they do, they go to their big B, which is their government, which is their I guess their capital, where all their representatives are, and they decide, hey, we're gonna send our militia to aid you guys. So they start attacking little a. Now, little a, what they do, they see, oh my gosh, I'm getting attacked by big B. That's bad. So they go to their big A and are like, hey, we're getting attacked by big a big giant A with a huge giant militia. And what little a does is they go, okay, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to gather all my A's and all my little A's and do a coordinated strike across the river to take out all the bees. And what ends up happening is it just becomes a giant war all over a simple waterway. And well, that's what happens when there is no sovereignty. What's supposed to happen is, okay, there's police. Now let's say they get into their argument and the shootout starts, people die, and what happens is in a normal world, little a will go and tell big A, and big A will tell little a to stop shooting, stop the killing, and B will do the same thing, usually to prevent a wider war. And in what should happen is A and B, their leaders will talk to each other. They go and talk, and that leads to diplomacy. That should lead to diplomacy. And let's say, I don't know, maybe B is a cynical king and doesn't care. Well, a war is going to happen anyway. But what we want is there to at least be we want there to at least be diplomacy and discourse before a war starts. That's usually why there are police. That's why there usually are uh, these these modern types of governments that we have. All right. Now let's say what you said was true, but let's also say that there is no B. There is no B. There is no other country. There's no other country B. There is just country A. Now, it would be possible for A to be self-governing, and it would be possible for A to put down any resistance, to put down any sort of stuff that happens, murderers and stuff like that, all the illegitimate types of sovereignty. Well, if we look back in history, this can be applied to also like a lot of the dynasties in China where there was a king, there was a head of government, right, that was supposed to represent the people, but since a lot of the towns were self-governing, a lot of them they would whenever there was political infighting, it would lead to things like coup d'etats or coups or secessions from the state altogether. There'd be lots of fighting, stuff like that would happen. There are problems with it, but I'm not saying that it's impossible, but there's got to be workarounds. There's got to be, I guess, good legislation for this to work. Because Big A has to have legitimacy and authority over all of the little a's. And if they don't have authority over all the little a's, then how can they enforce any laws? How can they enforce pretty much everything, anything? Even then, if Big A didn't have a lot of legitimacy, how could they even enforce something like a militia? How could they raise a militia to fight against B if there was another B country? You know, that's the problem with no sovereignty and no legitimacy. and I think I pretty much covered everything. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's pretty much it. All right. Bye-bye.